I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, frozen, holding a plate of freshly baked lasagna with trembling hands. I had just walked into the guest room, the one we'd made up for our son and his wife, while they stayed with us during their move, and saw something that unraveled 35 years of my life. His back was to me, her hair tangled around his fingers. My husband, my son's wife, laughing softly like teenagers sneaking a moment before a parent walked in. And I did. I walked in. But they didn't hear me. Not at first. When they did, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned around and walked back out. And something in me broke so quietly, I don't think they even noticed it until much later. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. I should have known something was wrong. The way he touched her arm in the kitchen last week. The way she laughed at all his jokes, the same ones I'd rolled my eyes at for years. But I told myself it was nothing. My son was out late working. She was lonely. My husband was trying to be kind. That's all. That's all it was. Until it wasn't. I walked back into the kitchen, set the lasagna down on the counter, and stared at it. It was still bubbling. It smelled like comfort, like family, like every Sunday dinner we'd shared for decades. But now, it was just a plate of lies wrapped in mozzarella and false peace. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and made myself a cup of tea. My fingers shook as I poured the water. But my face stayed calm. I'd learned that over the years, how to keep calm, even when the world split at the seams. I sat at the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sipped my tea and listened to the faint sound of them upstairs. A whisper, a creak of the floorboard, a giggle that turned to silence when they realized I'd seen. I thought of my son, my beautiful boy, my only child. I thought about his wedding, how I'd helped her pick her dress, how I'd cried, watching them say their vows. I thought of how he held my hand and kissed my cheek, thanking me for everything. And now this betrayal, not just of love, but of every ounce of trust I'd ever placed in them. They came downstairs about 10 minutes later. She didn't meet my eyes. He cleared his throat and asked if dinner was ready. I smiled. Almost, I said. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't move. I turned back to the oven and cut the lasagna into perfect squares, served it with garlic bread, poured glasses of wine. We ate together, the three of us, at the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, promotions. They chewed in silence. She barely touched her food. He tried to make conversation about the weather. I nodded, smiled, pretended not to notice the sweat on his forehead. It was in that moment, that still unbearable moment, that I decided. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't even ask why. I would let them think I was weak. Let them think they'd fooled me. And then I would plan. Not revenge. Not chaos. Something cleaner. Something final. I kissed them goodnight that evening. Kissed her on the cheek like a mother should. Hugged him, told him I'd always be here. They nodded, uncertain, their eyes scanning mine for something. I gave them nothing. I walked upstairs, sat on my bed, and let the silence surround me. The next day, I started writing. Not a diary, not a letter, a map, a plan. A quiet dismantling of the life I had built and the people who had desecrated it. I was done being the heart of this family. I was going to be its reckoning. There was a time when I thought love was unshakable, that if you gave everything, your time, your body, your patience, it would be enough, that if you sacrificed your dreams, If you forgave the things that weren't quite right, you could build something permanent. I used to believe that. I used to wear it like a second skin, the skin of a wife, a mother, a woman who held everything together so well that no one thought to ask if she was happy underneath it all. When I met James, I was 22, fresh out of college, full of hope and promise. He had a crooked smile, wore confidence like a well-tailored suit, and told stories that made everyone around him laugh. I was drawn to him like a flame. He made me feel like I was the only one in the room, and in those early years, maybe I was. We married a year later in a courthouse. I wore a cream dress my mother helped me hem the night before. He wore the same gray slacks he'd worn to our first date. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. We didn't have much, not in the beginning. A one-bedroom apartment with leaky pipes and noisy neighbors. But it was ours. I worked nights as a nurse. He sold insurance door to door. We counted pennies, saved coupons, and dreamed of something more. Every Sunday we'd walk through neighborhoods with big houses and imagine which one would be ours. Back then, those walks were filled with laughter and hand-holding and promises whispered under breath. When our son Michael was born, everything changed, in the best and worst ways. I gave up work for a while. James took on extra shifts. I stayed home learning the rhythm of motherhood. I fell in love all over again, first with the baby, then with the quiet way James looked at us both when he thought I wasn't watching. He loved our son fiercely, taught him to throw a ball, build model airplanes, and say please and thank you like a gentleman. I still see glimpses of that little boy in the man he became. But I also remember the loneliness, the nights James didn't come home until after midnight, the cold side of the bed, the excuses. I didn't ask too many questions. I didn't want to rock the boat. I thought that was what being a good wife meant, endurance, not interrogation. When he got his promotion and we moved into the house on Maple Lane, I thought maybe things would get better. For a while they did. We hosted barbecues in the backyard. We spent summers at the lake. Michael brought home school projects and hung them on the fridge. James coached Little League. I volunteered at church. From the outside, we looked like the picture of suburban stability. And maybe we were for a time. But cracks have a way of forming where no one can see them. Hairline fractures beneath the surface, silent at first. And then one day, everything breaks. When Michael brought Lauren home for the first time, I'll admit I didn't know what to think. She was beautiful, sharp, polished in a way that made me feel old. But she was kind. She offered to help with dishes, always brought flowers when she visited. She called me Mom after just 3 months, and I, desperate for connection, let her in. They married in the spring. A perfect April day with cherry blossoms and candlelight. James walked her down the aisle when her father didn't show. I remember thinking how proud he looked, how much he glowed when she kissed his cheek. I chalked it up to joy, to having a daughter he never had. It never crossed my mind that something darker was buried beneath that pride. Michael worked long hours in finance. She stayed home at first, said she was figuring things out. I offered her part-time work in my friend's boutique. She thanked me, but said no. She preferred her own pace. Sometimes she'd come over for lunch. Sometimes she'd be here before I even knew she was coming. James didn't mind. He always welcomed her in. Too warmly, too often. But back then, I still loved him. God help me, I still believed in him. Even when his hands stopped reaching for mine. Even when he forgot our anniversary 2 years in a row. I thought maybe I was changing. Maybe we both were. Maybe this was what it looked like after 35 years. I never expected the betrayal to come wrapped in the face of the woman I'd once called daughter. Looking back, there were signs, a misplaced glance, a too long hug. But love makes you blind, or maybe it makes you choose blindness, and I had spent my entire life choosing him, choosing family, choosing peace over pain, until that night. Now all I could think about was how much I had given, how much I had swallowed, and how little I had left. But I wouldn't let them take everything. They could have each other, but they wouldn't have me. Not anymore. It didn't start with a kiss or a late-night whisper. It started with distance, the kind that creeps in slowly like fog under a door. One morning, James forgot to kiss me goodbye. Just walked out, phone pressed to his ear, already halfway into his day. I stood by the window, holding my coffee, and watched him back out of the driveway without a glance. I told myself it was nothing. One moment, one morning. But it wasn't. It was the first of many. I tried to fight it. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his meetings, even wore perfume again. Chanel number 5, the one he used to say, reminded him of Paris, even though we'd never been. But his answers were short. His compliments vanished. His eyes, once filled with mischief and affection, became blank. Polite. Like I was a guest in my own marriage. Lauren came over more often. Too often. She started showing up mid-morning, claiming she was just dropping something off, or needed to borrow sugar or eggs. At first, I believed her. She was charming, always laughing, always offering to help with the laundry or walk the dog. I liked having her around. She made the house feel less lonely. But slowly, I started to notice. Her visits always aligned with James being home. She'd accidentally run into him in the garage. She'd forget something upstairs when he was the only one around. Still, I pushed the thoughts away. I told myself I was paranoid, jealous maybe, of her youth, her energy, her ability to make James smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. I tried to believe it was innocent. A father-in-law, a daughter-in-law enjoying each other's company. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday. Michael had called earlier, said he'd be working late. Lauren was already at the house helping me make dinner. James came home, loosened his tie, kissed my cheek out of habit, then poured himself a drink. We sat at the table, just the three of us, and everything felt wrong. Lauren kept laughing at things that weren't funny. James kept refilling her wine. They barely looked at me. I was there, but I wasn't. Invisible. A shadow sitting at the head of the table. After dinner, I went to the laundry room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked down the hallway and heard it a soft giggle, low murmurs. The guest room door wasn't shut all the way. I stepped closer. And then I saw it. His hand on her waist. Her face tilted toward his. Nothing overt. Nothing explicit. But enough. Enough to make my stomach turn and my knees go weak. They didn't see me. I backed away before they could. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it might give me away. I went back to the kitchen, washed the dishes with shaking hands, and stared at my reflection in the window. I looked old, tired, like someone I didn't recognize. That night in bed, James wrapped his arm around me like he always had, but it felt forced, heavy. I lay there, eyes open, counting the seconds between his breaths. And I knew something was happening. Something I didn't want to name. The next morning, I asked Michael if he thought Lauren was happy. He paused, said she seemed restless, that sometimes he felt like she was pulling away. I wanted to scream to tell him everything, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded and told him to talk to her, to make sure they were okay. I watched their marriage unravel from the sidelines. The argument started. Small at first, about bills, about time, about nothing. Lauren would come to me crying. James would stay quiet. Michael worked more. Everyone was looking in the wrong direction. One afternoon, I caught James watching her. Not in a fatherly way. In a way, a man looks at a woman he wants, and she didn't look away. That's when I stopped denying it. That's when I started writing everything down. Times, dates, glances, patterns. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I began to move through the house like a ghost, watching, listening. I stopped trying to please him, stopped trying to win back something that was already gone. Instead, I paid attention. Who touched who? Who lingered in which room? When and why? And slowly, the truth came into focus. They were playing a dangerous game. One they thought I was too old, too blind, too naive to understand. But I saw everything, every lie, every shift in tone, every stolen moment they thought went unnoticed. I didn't confront them, not yet. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to have it all laid out before I made my move. Because when I did, I wouldn't be asking questions. I'd be ending things. Quietly, permanently, and the moment would come soon. Sooner than they thought. The hardest part wasn't what they did. It was pretending I didn't know. Waking up each day beside a man I once trusted more than anyone and smiling through the betrayal. Offering her tea when she dropped by unannounced. Laughing at their jokes. Setting the table for 3 when my heart wanted to throw every plate at the wall. That was the real pain. The silence, the swallowing, the performance. I became an actress in my own life, a ghost in my own house. But it wasn't because I was weak. No, it was because I needed time. Time to think. Time to understand just how deep the rot went. And time to figure out what justice would look like. Not revenge. I wasn't that kind of woman. But justice was mine to shape. I started small. I moved my jewelry box from the bedroom to the back of my closet. I changed the password on our shared bank account. I bought a second phone and hid it in a box of winter scarves. Every time they were alone together, I made a note. Time, place, words. I tracked it all in that little phone like a war journal. James had no idea. Neither did Lauren. They were too wrapped up in their own little fantasy to notice the woman watching from the corner. The woman who had sacrificed everything to build this family. The woman they had underestimated. One evening, James came home later than usual. He said he was stuck at a meeting, but I knew better. Lauren had shown up earlier that day, said she'd forgotten a sweater. She stayed for nearly an hour. I heard the door open and close. I heard their muffled voices down the hallway. And then, silence. I waited upstairs, heart-pounding phone recording in my hand as footsteps creaked on the guest room floor. When he walked through the door that night, I handed him a plate of reheated dinner and smiled. "Long day?" I asked. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Very," he said. I watched him eat, wondering how many lies he'd have to chew through before the food lost its taste. Over the next few weeks, I laid the groundwork. I met with a lawyer quietly, discreetly. A woman named Patricia, who specialized in divorce and asset protection. I told her everything. Not all the details, but enough. Enough to make it clear this wasn't just about adultery. It was about betrayal. She looked me in the eye and said, "We'll protect what's yours." I updated my will. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance. I removed James from my power of attorney. All legal, all clean. And all done without a whisper. If he noticed the mail, he didn't say a word. I started locking the guest room door when they weren't home. Said it was to keep the dog from scratching at the bed. But really, I was laying a boundary they didn't even realize was a line in the sand. A silent declaration that the space was no longer theirs to steal. The hardest part was seeing Michael, my son. He had no idea. He thought he was just going through a rough patch with his wife. He thought his father was being supportive. And I was just mom. Just the woman who made casseroles and offered advice and kept her pain tucked neatly behind her smile. One day, he came over and sat with me in the kitchen. "You think Lauren still loves me?" he asked. My throat tightened. Of course I lied. She's just lost. Maybe she needs to figure herself out. He nodded, eyes rimmed red. I feel like I'm losing everything. I wanted to scream then, to grab him and shake the truth into him. But I didn't. I placed my hand on his and said, "Sometimes things fall apart so better things can come together." He didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. Lauren grew bolder. She wore tighter clothes around the house. She touched James's arm when I was in the room, testing me, daring me, and I gave her nothing. Just soft smiles and quiet observations. Let her think she was winning. One night, I walked into the living room to find them sitting too close on the couch. She was laughing, hand on his knee. He looked up startled when he saw me. I raised an eyebrow. "We were just talking," he said. I nodded. "Of course," I said, and sat down in the armchair across from them. I picked up my knitting. The room fell silent, tense, like a wire pulled too tight. She excused herself after a few minutes. He followed. Later that night, I stood outside the guest room door again, ear pressed to the wood. Nothing, then a whisper, then a laugh. I held the phone against the crack and hit record. I didn't listen right away. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd hear. That was the night I began planning the dinner. The dinner that would end everything. I picked a Saturday. A quiet, uneventful Saturday. One of those gray days that makes everyone feel a little heavier, a little more nostalgic. It was the kind of day no one expects anything to happen. That's exactly why I chose it. I told them both earlier in the week. Dinner just the three of us, no excuses. James nodded without hesitation. Lauren smiled too quickly. Her eyes flicked toward James, then back to me. "Sounds great, Mom," she said. I kept my face steady, my voice light. "I'll make your favorite." In the days leading up to it, I finished the last of my preparations. I moved the recordings off the phone and onto a flash drive. I labeled it tax receipts and slipped it into a folder of old financial paperwork. I wrote a letter to Michael. Not for now. No, I wasn't ready for him to know. But one day, when the truth inevitably bubbled up, I wanted him to have something in my own words, a map of what happened and why I chose silence over spectacle. I met with Patricia one last time. She handed me a thick envelope finalized paperwork financial protection statements I would use when it was time to draw the final line. I slipped it into my purse and locked it in the fireproof box under the bed. My insurance in every sense of the word. I cleaned the house like I always did. Not out of habit, but ceremony. I wanted everything to feel normal, even sacred. The rugs vacuumed, the silver polished. I set the dining table with the good plates, the ones we'd received at our wedding and barely used. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, soft candlelight. A perfect scene. One last performance. The morning of the dinner, I went to the farmer's market. Picked the best produce. Fresh basil, sun-ripened tomatoes, garlic so strong I could smell it through the paper bag. I made homemade pasta from scratch. Rolled the dough slowly, deliberately. I wanted the work of my hands to ground me. The task, the rhythm reminded me of who I used to be, a woman who found joy in the simple act of feeding people she loved. By 5 o'clock, the house smelled like heaven. Roasted vegetables, garlic bread, a slow-cooked red sauce simmering on the stove. I wore a navy dress. Modest, clean lines. I pinned my hair up and put on lipstick, just a hint of color enough to feel present. James arrived first. He looked tired. "Smells amazing in here," he said. I kissed his cheek. "It should. I've been working on it all day." He looked at me a moment too long, as if trying to read between my words. But I was unreadable now. Lauren came next. She wore a silk blouse and heels, overdressed for a casual dinner. Her eyes darted around the room, clocking the candles, the table. "Wow," she said. "This looks beautiful." I smiled. "Only the best for family." We sat down. I poured the wine and aged bottle James had saved for a special occasion. I decided this qualified. We toasted to what I can't even remember. Something hollow like good health or strong families. I didn't flinch. They ate slowly. The food was too good to rush. James made small talk, work weather nonsense. Lauren nodded, tried to laugh. I listened, responded politely. I let the conversation flow like water over glass. Nothing stuck. Nothing mattered. Not anymore. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and folded my hands. My heart beat steady. My voice was calm. "I know," I said. James froze. His fork hovered midair. Lauren blinked wineglass inches from her lips. "I've known for months." No one spoke. I turned to Lauren first. "Do you remember the afternoon you said you were picking up a sweater, and I was upstairs changing the guest bed linens?" Her mouth opened closed. "You left your phone on the kitchen counter. I heard everything." James tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "No, not yet." I turned to him. "Do you remember the night you came home late and told me your meeting ran long? I followed you that day. Saw you leave the hotel." His face turned gray. I reached down, pulled a small flash drive from my purse, and laid it on the table. "Everything is here. Every whisper, every touch, every lie." Lauren pushed her plate away. "I am not interested in your excuses," I said, eyes steady. "This isn't a discussion. It's a declaration." I stood, walked to the china cabinet, and retrieved the envelope. Laid it next to the flash drive. "These are the divorce papers. They've already been reviewed and approved. You'll sign them this week, or I'll take everything public. I have nothing left to protect." James looked sick, truly sick. "We didn't mean for stop," I said. "You did. You meant every moment. You chose it. Both of you. Over and over. Now you get to live with it." Lauren began to cry. Not sobs, soft, confused tears. "I didn't think I never wanted to hurt. You wanted what you wanted," I said. "And now you have it. I just won't be part of it." I left the room then. Walked upstairs, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I listened to the silence below. The clink of utensils, the scrape of chairs, the sound of a life falling apart under the weight of its own selfishness. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. They didn't leave right away. No, they lingered. I could hear them downstairs long after I closed the bedroom door. Whispers, arguments, the occasional clink of a glass being moved or dropped. I imagined them scrambling, trying to rewrite the script, trying to figure out what I knew and when. But it didn't matter. I had already won. The truth was out. The performance was over. The next morning, James was gone. His keys were missing from the hook. His toothbrush from the bathroom. A few drawers in the dresser stood open half empty. He didn't leave a note. I didn't need one. His silence was as loud as any confession. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom we once shared and stared at the space he left behind. It wasn't grief that filled me. It was something cleaner. Relief, maybe. The first breath after surfacing from deep water. Lauren was still in the guest room. I heard her crying in the early hours, muffled sobs pressed into pillows. By noon, she was gone too. She didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. She left behind a pair of earrings on the bathroom sink and a scarf hanging on the coat rack. I threw both into a plastic bag and stuffed it in the back of the closet. Out of sight, out of mind. Michael came by that evening. He hadn't heard yet. James must have told him he was going away for work. That was always his excuse when he needed to disappear. Michael looked tired, shoulders heavy. "Lauren's not answering my texts," he said. I nodded. "She might need some time," I told him. My voice stayed level. "Maybe she's figuring things out." He sighed and rubbed his eyes. I don't know what to do anymore." I placed a hand on his arm. "Take care of yourself. Focus on your job. Give her space. Whatever she decides, it's not your fault." That night, after he left, I opened the fireproof box again. I took out the letter I had written for him, read it over in the quiet of my room. It was full of love, of memories, of the kind of truth that breaks gently. I sealed it in an envelope and marked it with his name. Someday he would find it. Someday when the time was right. In the weeks that followed, James tried to come back. First, it was a phone call. I didn't answer. Then a letter slipped through the mail slot, no envelope, just folded pages filled with apologies. Rambling, desperate apologies. He said he'd been lonely, that he felt invisible, that he didn't recognize himself anymore. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just understanding. But I had no space left for either. He called again, left a voicemail, said he was staying with a friend, that he missed the smell of my cooking, the sound of my laugh. I deleted it. I didn't want to remember that he once made me laugh. I didn't want to miss anything about him. Lauren texted me once. Just one line, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She wasn't the one who owed me anything anymore. Patricia called to confirm the paperwork had gone through. "You're free," she said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true in a way I hadn't felt in decades. I was free. Not just from James or Lauren, but from the years I'd spent sacrificing, swallowing, settling. I went through the house room by room, pulled old photos from shelves, the wedding portraits, the vacation snapshots, the candid smiles that now felt like lies. I put them in a box and taped it shut. Some I kept pictures of Michael as a child, moments that were real, even if the people in them had become strangers. I started changing things, repainted the guest room, took down the heavy curtains James liked, rearranged the furniture in the living room so that every angle reminded me of me. My taste, my space, my life. The dog, our old retriever, followed me from room to room, sensing the shift. He slept curled at my feet as I rearranged, as I scrubbed baseboards, as I reclaimed every inch. I whispered to him sometimes, told him things I couldn't say out loud. He listened with soft eyes and gentle breaths. Neighbors noticed James was gone. Some asked. I told them he was taking time to sort things out. They nodded politely. One or two looked at me with something like sympathy, but I didn't need their pity. I needed my peace, and I was finding it piece by piece. The mail stopped coming in his name. The calls slowed. The weight on my chest lifted slowly like dawn. I didn't cry. Not once. Not in the days after they left. Not when I signed the final page. Not when I took off my wedding ring and dropped it into the back of a drawer. My tears had dried long ago. What was left now was strength. A quiet, rooted strength that had been waiting under the surface all along. And in that silence, I started to dream again. Not big dreams, just tiny ones. Planting herbs in the kitchen window, repainting the porch swing, relearning how to sleep without expecting a voice beside me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. I was home, alone, and it was beautiful. I didn't plan on seeing him again, not face to face. I thought our last exchange had already happened. The dinner, the flash drive, the envelope laid on the table like a guillotine. But James wasn't done. He never did know when to let go. It was 3 weeks after the divorce papers were filed. A soft Sunday morning. I had just returned from the market, a basket of fresh produce on my arm, when I found him sitting on the porch swing like nothing had changed, like he still belonged there. He looked smaller, not in stature, but in spirit. His clothes hung loose on him. His hands trembled slightly as he stood. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. I didn't invite him inside. I set the basket down and sat in the chair opposite him, the same way I had during that dinner. My eyes didn't waver. I just needed to say something he started. "Really say it." I waited. He rubbed his face. "I don't know who I am anymore." I thought I could justify it. Tell myself it was just a mistake. But it wasn't. It was a choice. A horrible, selfish choice. And I made it over and over. Still, I said nothing. "I didn't do it because I stopped loving you," he said, eyes searching mine. "I did it because I stopped loving myself. And Lauren, she was just there. She listened. She made me feel young, seen." A bitter laugh escaped me. "She saw you all right, saw your weakness, your need, and she used it. But you let her." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I let her, and I ruined everything." There was silence then, just the sound of birds in the distance, the creak of the old swing. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just needed to face you, to own it." I stared at the man I once married, the man I built a life with. I saw the years in his face, the lines, the sagging around his eyes, the gray in his beard. He was no longer the charming boy with the crooked smile. He was a man who had burned down his own home and stood in the ashes asking for understanding. "You don't get to erase it," I said. Not with an apology. Not with sad eyes. "You broke something you can't fix." "I know," he whispered. "And yet, here you are," I said, still trying. He looked down. "Because even if I lost everything, I couldn't live with not trying." I stood. "Then try living with what you've done instead." I turned and walked to the door. But before I went inside, I paused. "You know what the worst part was?" I said, voice low. "It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the lies. It was realizing I spent 35 years giving everything to a man who didn't know how to protect what mattered." His mouth opened, but no words came. I closed the door behind me. Inside, I leaned against it, breath shaking. My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. I refused to let my tears be for him. Not anymore. He didn't come back after that. But Lauren did. 2 days later, she showed up unannounced. No warning. No text. Just appeared at my door like a ghost. "Please," she said when I opened it. "Can I talk to you?" I should have slammed the door. But I didn't. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked different. Makeup-smudged hair pulled back in a careless bun. She wore the same hoodie she used to borrow from Michael. That hurt more than anything. "I don't even know where to start," she said, wringing her hands. "I thought I loved him. I thought I was doing something brave. Leaving a marriage that didn't feel right. Finding someone who really saw me." I poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of her. And now I asked. Now I realize I destroyed everything she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I hurt Michael. I hurt you. I ruined a family that gave me everything." I watched her. She was still young, Still foolish? But maybe there was some part of her that understood the damage. "Do you love him?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't even like him anymore. He turned cold the minute everything fell apart. He doesn't want me. He just didn't want to be alone." "And what do you want?" I asked. She looked lost. "I want to start over, but I don't know how." I sipped my water, letting her words settle. "You'll figure it out," I said. "But not here. Not with us. That chapter's closed." She nodded, tears falling freely now. I wanted you to know I never meant to hurt you. I thought you hated me." "I did," I said plainly. "But hate fades. Disappointment lingers longer." She stood slowly. "I'm sorry." I nodded once. As she walked to the door, she paused. "Thank you for letting me say it." I didn't respond. The door closed behind her, and I stood alone again, in the quiet of my home, the echoes of 2 apologies still hanging in the air. But neither one healed anything. Neither one changed what had been done. Still, they were necessary. For them, for me. A page had been turned. Not because of their remorse, but because I chose to keep turning. The house was quieter now, not the eerie silence of a place abandoned, but a peace I hadn't felt in years. No more hurried footsteps trying to avoid confrontation. No more forced laughter in the living room. No more glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. Just the creak of old floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional bark from the dog as he napped by the window. It was my house again. My sanctuary. I spent the next few weeks settling into the quiet. I didn't rush to fill it. I let it surround me. I found new rhythms, morning coffee on the porch, long walks through the neighborhood, sorting through closets I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't just about cleaning. It was about reclaiming space. My space. Every drawer I organized, every item I tossed, felt like an exhale I'd been holding in too long. The hardest room to face was the guest room, the scene of their betrayal. The place where I had lost something I didn't even know I could lose. Not love, not trust, but belief. Belief in the illusion I'd built so carefully for so long. Still, one morning, I walked in and stood there for a long time. I stripped the bed, took down the curtains, pulled everything out of the closet, the scarf Lauren had left behind, into the trash. The bottle of aftershave James used to keep in the drawer poured down the sink. I scrubbed the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. When I was done, I painted the room a pale, airy blue. Something light. Something mine. Michael called more often. He sensed the change, even if he didn't know the cause. "You sound different," he said one day. "Better? Stronger?" I smiled into the phone. "I'm getting there." He didn't ask about Lauren anymore. I didn't offer. We spoke of small things, work, weather, childhood memories, and it was enough. One afternoon, I sat in the garden with a cup of tea and reread the letter I'd written him. I held it between my hands and stared at the words. So much pain. So much love. I thought about mailing it, but something stopped me. It wasn't time yet. He was healing in his own way. When he was ready, he'd come with questions. And when he did, I'd be ready with answers. I also started writing again. Not just letters or lists, but stories. Real stories. Fiction mostly. Characters who had suffered and survived. Women who had been pushed aside only to rise again stronger than anyone expected. It felt good to create. To use my voice for something other than silence. I wrote late into the nights, the soft click of the keys, a comfort I hadn't known I needed. One morning, I ran into an old friend at the bookstore. Carol. We used to work together back when the kids were young. She hugged me tight and said, "You look good." Peaceful. I laughed. Looks can be deceiving. But she tilted her head and smiled. Not always. She invited me to join her book club. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure I was ready to sit in a room full of women discussing fiction, while my own life still felt like a closed novel with bent pages. But I went. I sat in a circle of voices and laughter and wine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as a wife, not as a mother, but as myself. I told them a little, not much, just that I was starting over, that I was learning how to enjoy my own company. One woman, a widow named Helen, patted my hand and said, "That's the most sacred thing we can do, learn to like the silence of our own hearts." I didn't cry, but I felt something shift. And then came the envelope. It arrived in the mail, no return address, inside a single photograph. Me, James, and Michael, taken 20 years ago on the front lawn. I was laughing, head tilted back, Michael on my hip. James had his arms around us both. The picture was creased, worn at the edges. On the back, in James's handwriting, were 4 words: "I'm sorry for everything." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. I tucked the photo into a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of what once was, of what I survived. Later that night, I walked through the house and lit a single candle in each room. It was something I used to do during storms when Michael was little and afraid of the dark. But tonight, it wasn't about fear. It was about illumination, about claiming light in every corner. I stood in the guest room last, the soft blue walls glowing in the candlelight. I whispered, "You don't win to no one in particular, not to James, not to Lauren, but to the shadow of myself that had once cowered in silence." Then I blew the candle out. There are some truths too heavy to speak aloud, too thick with memory, with pain, with shame. That's why I wrote the letter. Not to be dramatic, not to wound, but to say what needed saying in a way that could be reread if forgotten, revisited when the questions finally came. I sealed it months ago after that final dinner. After James walked out for the last time, and Lauren vanished into whatever shadows she now calls home. I wrote it for Michael, for the boy I raised, the man still searching for footing in a world that cracked beneath his feet. It started with love, because that's how all our stories began. I wrote about holding him for the first time, how his cry split the air, how his tiny fingers curled around mine like he knew me already. I told him about the sleepless nights, the first steps, the scraped knees, the joy of watching him run across a soccer field with his jersey too big, his smile even bigger. I told him about the pride, the overwhelming pride of seeing the man he became, kind, determined, loyal, everything his father stopped being. Then I told the truth. I wrote plainly without bitterness. James betrayed me, and not with a stranger, not in the shadows of some faraway city. With Lauren, with the woman who stood beside Michael at the altar, who called me Mom while curling her fingers around my husband's arm. I told him I found out on a Thursday, that I didn't scream, that I didn't break anything, that I simply watched and listened and chose silence because that was the only language they couldn't translate. I explained how I documented everything not for revenge, but for proof. Because gaslighting is a slow poison, and I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I told him about the flash drive, about the lawyer, about the dinner, about how I served the meal they loved and served the truth they feared, and how I walked away not because I couldn't fight, but because I was done bleeding for people who drank my peace. I told him I never stopped loving him, that none of this was his fault, that his pain, though tied to mine, was his to process in his own time. I wrote that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others, it's a salve you offer to yourself when the scars no longer sting. I hoped he'd find it. Eventually. I didn't write this letter to tear him apart. I wrote it to piece myself back together, and to leave behind a map in case he ever found himself as lost as I was. The letter is in the safe now, labeled simply for Michael. When you're ready, I've made peace with the idea that he might not open it for years, or ever. That's okay. I didn't write it for closure. I wrote it because some truths deserve to be spoken, even if only on paper. One morning, I stood in the hallway outside his childhood bedroom and looked at the photos still hanging there. His graduation, his wedding, him as a toddler, face smeared with chocolate. I didn't take them down. They're part of the story, too. The joy was real. The love was real. The ending didn't erase the beginning. A few days later, I passed by a local thrift shop and noticed they were taking book donations. I boxed up old novels, some cookbooks, a few biographies James never finished. But I kept the poetry. The ones I read in college. The ones that reminded me who I was before marriage, before motherhood, before betrayal. That night, I sat with a journal and wrote something just for me. No one else would read it. It was a list, not of grievances, not of regrets, but of things I'd learned, about people, about survival, about what it means to live after your world implodes. I wrote, silence can be armor, but it can also be a prison. Kindness without boundaries is not virtue, it's self-neglect. People will take as much as you give until you give them nothing. Starting over doesn't mean erasing the past. It means refusing to live in it. Peace is not the absence of pain. It's the choice to stop bleeding for those who cut you. The next day, I bought myself flowers. Not because it was a special occasion, but because I was done waiting for someone else to remind me I was worth the beauty. As I placed them in a vase on the kitchen table, the same table where the truth had been served, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked older, yes, but I also looked unburdened, like a woman who had walked through fire and didn't need applause, only air. Michael called that night, just to say hi, just to tell me about a new project at work. He didn't ask about Lauren, didn't ask about James. I didn't offer, but before he hung up, he said, "You've been on my mind a lot lately. I don't say it enough, but I love you, Mom." My throat tightened. I love you too, sweetheart. And that was enough. For now. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, toothbrush in hand, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she was unfamiliar, but because she was finally honest. No more soft eyes trained to make others feel safe. No more tight smiles covering bruises no one could see. I saw every line, every shadow under my eyes and didn't turn away. I looked like a woman who had lived, who had been broken and put herself back together piece by piece without asking anyone else to help. I whispered to the mirror, "This is who you are now." And for the first time in a long time, I believed myself. The reflection didn't lie. I spent that day doing nothing extraordinary. I made a pot of soup. I changed the sheets on the bed. I watered the basil by the kitchen window and opened the windows to let the breeze carry through the hallways. But something about the stillness felt different, like a reckoning had finally passed, and I could just be. In the afternoon, I took a walk to the park 3 blocks away. It had always been there, but I hadn't visited it in years. I sat on a weathered bench under an old oak tree watching children chase each other through the grass. One of the mothers nearby offered me a smile. I returned it soft and small. A man sat on the bench across from me, gray hair, thick glasses, a book in his lap. He looked over and nodded. Not the kind of nod that invites conversation, just one of recognition. Two people sharing the same patch of sunlight? That was enough. As I watched the leaves rustle and dance above me, I thought about all the roles I had played in my life. Daughter, wife, mother, friend. And I wondered how many of those roles I had chosen, and how many were given to me, inherited like hand-me-down clothes that never quite fit. I had spent so much of my life managing other people's emotions, making sure James felt admired, making sure Michael felt safe, making sure Lauren felt welcomed. I had shaped myself around their needs so fully that I hadn't realized I'd disappeared from my own story, until the silence after the betrayal gave me room to hear my own voice again. I remember reading once that women are taught to be mirrors, to reflect others' brilliance, to magnify their light, to make them feel whole. But what happens when the mirror breaks, when the reflection cracks? What do we see then? I saw myself. And I wasn't just a mirror. I was the frame, the wall, the foundation. I was the house they had all lived in. And now, I was learning how to rebuild with better walls. That night, I took out the old wedding photo album, not because I wanted to relive it, but because I needed to close it. I flipped through every page, each smile, each cake-cutting moment, each honeymoon kiss. They felt like watching strangers perform a play I once believed was real. I didn't cry. I didn't burn the album. I simply closed it and placed it on a high shelf where it couldn't call out to me anymore. Then I opened a new photo album completely blank. I slid in a picture I had taken that morning, sunlight falling across the floor, casting a golden glow over the hardwood. It wasn't a photo of a person, just light, but it felt like a beginning. I wrote a caption under it, "The day I remembered what peace looks like." Later, while making tea, I got a call from Helen, the widow from the book club. "We're going to the coast next weekend," she said. "A few of us. Just a day trip. You should come." I hesitated. The coast held memories too. Family vacations, matching towels, James teaching Michael to skip rocks. But those ghosts didn't scare me anymore. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long," Helen replied. "You deserve the sea." After we hung up, I laughed to myself. You deserve the sea. What a strange, beautiful thing to say. Maybe I did. I stood by the window and watched the stars blink into view. I thought about what it meant to be alone, not lonely, but alone with intention. Alone by choice. There's a difference. And I was learning to love it. Before bed, I pulled out my journal and wrote one line. "I am not rebuilding what broke, I am building something entirely new." Then I turned out the light and let the dark hold me, not as a threat, but as a cocoon. I slept better than I had in months. No dreams. Just quiet. Finalizing the divorce didn't bring the kind of thunderclap closure people expect. There was no slamming of doors, no final dramatic showdown in a courtroom. Just paperwork. A signature on the last page of a long betrayal. My name steady, clean, unshaken, scrawled in black ink. James's signature had come in a manila envelope delivered by courier. No handwritten note, no plea, just initials on the dotted lines. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looked at those documents, and realized something important. This was not an end soaked in grief. It was a gift, a clean, unmistakable exit. I gathered what remained of him. A few old sweatshirts, books I never liked, cologne bottles now crusted and half full. I placed everything into boxes and labeled them plainly, James. No bitterness, just truth. I didn't burn anything. That's not who I am. But I didn't keep a single thing either. I wasn't building a shrine to what had died. I called a local charity to arrange a pickup. When the truck came, two young men in blue shirts loaded the boxes into the back without asking questions. One of them turned to me and said, "Fresh start, huh?" I smiled. Something like that. He gave me a nod, and then they were gone. I turned back into my house and felt the echo of something lifting. The rooms felt lighter, like they'd been waiting for this just as much as I had. The air didn't carry his scent anymore. The walls didn't hold his laughter or lies. They were mine now. All of it was mine. I walked through each room slowly, almost reverently. I touched the arm of the couch, the edge of the bookshelf, the light switch in the hallway. Little things I used to rush past. I paused in the hallway and looked at the framed photos, Michael at 6 missing his front teeth. Me holding a birthday cake. Even James long ago smiling with arms wrapped around both of us. I didn't take them down. I wasn't erasing history. I was just stepping outside of it. I kept the wedding ring in a jewelry box on the top shelf of my closet. Not because it meant anything anymore, but because it once did. That's the strange part about endings. They don't always need destruction. Sometimes they just need acknowledgement. A quiet bow. A curtain falling with grace instead of rage. Over the next few days, I let go of more. Not just things, but expectations. The idea that I needed to hold the family together at all costs. The need to be the one everyone turned to, leaned on, bled dry. I stopped answering every phone call. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped apologizing for being quiet, for needing space, for wanting solitude. I started gardening again. Not the way I used to, with urgency and pressure to make everything perfect. But softly, slowly. I planted lavender and rosemary in the backyard. I let the dirt get under my nails. I let my back ache from crouching too long. I found joy in the mess of it. There was no one watching me anymore. No one to impress. Just me and the soil and the sun. Helen called again. "The coast is still on the table," she said. "Think you're ready?" "I think I am," I replied. We went on a Saturday. A group of 5 women, all in different stages of grief, rebirth, or somewhere in between. We drove along the winding roads with the windows down, wind in our hair, music too loud for our age, and perfect for our hearts. When we reached the ocean, I took off my shoes and walked into the sand like it was sacred. The waves were loud and angry that day, crashing hard against the rocks. And still, I felt peace. I stood at the edge of the water and whispered, thank you to no one in particular. To myself, to the sea, to whatever force in the universe had given me the strength to let go. On the drive home, someone asked if I was dating again. I laughed. A real whole laugh. "No," I said. "I'm dating myself for a while. She deserves it." When I got home, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on the porch. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long, golden streaks across the sky. I sipped slowly, watching the day fold into night. There were no ghosts left in the corners of my house. No shadows lurking. No voices in the walls. Only me. And that was more than enough. The change wasn't sudden. It came in inches, like the slow thaw of frost in early spring. There was no dramatic transformation, no thunderclap epiphany. Just little moments where I noticed I was smiling to myself. For no reason at all. Standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. Folding a warm towel from the dryer. Hearing a song from the radio that used to make me cry, and realizing it didn't anymore. That was the true marker of healing, not forgetting, not erasing, but changing the weight of things. Letting memories live in the attic of your mind without dragging them into every room you enter. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center. Something I'd always wanted to do, but never made time for. James used to say we didn't have the budget for hobbies. Lauren used to roll her eyes when I mentioned wanting to be creative. "You should just relax, Mom," she'd say, as if stillness and stagnation were the same thing. The class was on Thursday evenings. The teacher, a man named Marco, had laugh lines deeper than any clay grooves he carved. "It's not about making something perfect," he told us during the first class. "It's about making something that's yours." I made mugs at first. Ugly, lopsided ones. But they held tea just fine. And something about the imperfection felt beautiful. Honest. I brought one home each week, lining them up on the kitchen shelf. I drank from a different one every morning. A quiet celebration. A reminder that I was building again with my hands, my time, my choosing. Michael came by one Sunday. He hadn't been to the house since the divorce finalized. He stood in the hallway longer than usual, looking at the rearranged furniture, the lighter paint, the softer energy. "It feels different," he said. I nodded. "It is." He walked into the kitchen and noticed the mugs. "Did you make these? All of them?" He picked one up, ran a finger along the uneven edge. "They're kind of awesome." "Kind of," I agreed. He sat at the table and we drank coffee from mismatched cups. He talked about work, a new coworker he might be interested in. I listened, watched the light return to his face. The same face I'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. He didn't ask about Lauren. I think he knew not to. The silence between us on that topic wasn't heavy anymore. It was respectful. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "I always thought you'd be crushed," he said quietly. I looked up at him surprised. "When Dad left, when everything came out, I thought it would destroy you." I gave him a small smile. So did they. He nodded, eyes soft. "I'm glad they were wrong. Me too." After he left, I went into the garden and pulled weeds with bare hands. The sun was warm on my back. I thought about all the times I'd bent over backwards for other people. And now, I was bending over the earth, and it was bending back for me. Later that week, I went to a local art show where our ceramics class had displayed some of our work. My pieces sat quietly on a table in the corner, surrounded by loud, flashy sculptures. But people lingered by mine longer than I expected. One woman picked up a mug and turned it over. "It's not perfect," she said to her friend, "but it feels good, like it was made with something honest." I didn't say a word, just smiled to myself and moved on. That night, I lit candles again, one in every room. I walked slowly barefoot across warm floors, letting the flicker of light remind me I was still here, still choosing, still growing. I passed by the guest room, now my sewing room. The walls still soft blue, the air always scented with lavender. I paused at the doorway. No anger, no sadness. Just space. Space that used to hold pain, now holding possibility. I stood there a moment, then whispered, "You don't get to live here anymore. Not James, not Lauren, not the version of myself that once thought her value depended on being needed." I walked to the bedroom, pulled the letter from the safe again. "For Michael. When you're ready." I reread it, made a small change to the end. I added a postscript. "And if you never read this, that's okay too, because you're doing just fine. And so am I." I sealed it again, placed it back in the safe. Then I changed into pajamas, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers around me. I didn't check my phone. Didn't scroll through old pictures. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft ticking of the clock. And just before sleep took me, I whispered to the quiet I made it. Not with fanfare, not with fire, but with grace, with grit, with peace. The call came on a Wednesday morning. I was making oatmeal, humming softly to the sound of birds outside the kitchen window. I almost didn't answer. The number was unknown, and I'd grown fond of ignoring interruptions. But something nudged me. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up. "Mrs. Langley," the voice asked. "This is Linda from Sanderson and Wells Law Firm. I believe we have a file here marked urgent addressed to you left by your former husband. I didn't speak at first. My chest felt heavy, but not with panic. It was something else. A curiosity soaked in calm. Yes, I said, finally. I'm listening. He passed last night, she said gently. Heart failure. He left instructions. There's a trust account and a letter. I thanked her, ended the call, and stood at the window watching the wind stir the leaves. James was gone. There was no sobbing, no breath stolen from my lungs. Just a slow, strange stillness, like hearing a chapter close with the click of a hardback cover. 3 days later, I sat in the lawyer's office, a thick envelope in my lap. Inside, final documents, account details, and a letter addressed in his handwriting, wobbly now, unfamiliar. I waited until I got home to read it. I lit a candle, sat in my sewing room, and opened it. My dearest Elaine, it began. If you're reading this, I am gone. I know I have no right to ask for your attention, but I hope you'll give me a few minutes more. Because there are things I never said, and now, when nothing more can be taken or demanded, I want to leave you with truth. I never stopped loving you. I stopped loving myself, and everything else followed. I betrayed you in the most unthinkable way. I know that. I see it every time I look in the mirror. Or looked. You didn't deserve that pain, and you didn't owe me silence, but you gave it anyway. That silence was not weakness, it was power. You gave me dignity even when I gave you disgrace. You once told me love wasn't a feeling. It was a decision made daily. I stopped making that decision. You never did. I've left you everything. The accounts, the lake house, even the land in Vermont. I took my name off all of it before I signed my will. It's yours now. Not out of guilt, out of recognition. You built this family. You held it together. You owned it all along. I folded the letter and placed it beside me. Then I opened the second envelope, the trust account documents. Everything was in my name, quietly legally transferred 6 weeks before his death. Hidden like so much else he did, but this time not to hurt me, to restore something. A small redemption too late for love, but not for legacy. I didn't cry, but I did sit for a long time, the candle flickering beside me. I thought about the lake house, the one we bought when Michael was in high school. I hadn't been there in years. James used to call it our escape hatch. Now it was mine. The next weekend, I drove up, alone. The keys still worked. The air smelled like pine and memory. The floors creaked in the same familiar ways. I opened every window. I aired out the ghosts. I spent 2 days there, reading, walking the shoreline, watching deer move silently through the trees. On the second morning, I scattered a few rose petals into the lake, not as a tribute to James, but as a release. My way of letting the past drift away quietly without ceremony or bitterness. On the way home, I stopped by Michael's. He met me at the door, hugged me tighter than usual. You heard, I asked. He nodded. Yeah. He didn't cry either. We sat on his porch, drank coffee, watched his dog chase squirrels. After a while, I said, "There's a letter for you, in my safe, when you're ready." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Okay. We didn't need to say more. A few weeks later, I hosted a dinner. Not for them. For the women from the ceramics class, Helen from the book club, Carol from the bookstore. We ate on the porch under string lights. Used the mugs I made. Laughed until our cheeks ached. Near the end of the evening, Helen raised her glass. To Elaine, she said, "The quiet storm." I smiled. It was the first time in a long time I felt truly celebrated. That night, after everyone left, I stood in the kitchen and looked around. Same walls, same floors, but a new woman. I am not the wife who was betrayed. I am not the mother who watched her son's heart shatter. I am not the woman who folded herself into corners. I am Elaine. I survived. I rebuilt. I am free.